Alright, class. Welcome in, welcome in. We got a lot to cover today, so buckle up. If I can turn your attention to the big screen up there. Okay, here's how it's gonna go down. We're gonna start off with all your general basics first that every class can do. Then we're gonna move on to Hunter, then Warlock, then Titan. And as you know, this is a movement guide. There will be timestamps. You can see that at the bottom. If you want to see a certain thing, you can skip to the time code. Easy peasy. But we're going to have a lot of things to cover, and you might learn a couple things. So, hey, you're here for, let's say ground skating? Hey, go right ahead. Everyone on the same page? Great. Let's get started. On top of ordering this by classes, I'm going to rate them by difficulty and practicality. We'll start off with the least difficult first and then move up to most difficult. If a lot of things are really easy, like a difficulty of 1, for example, they're not going to be in any particular order because they all have the same rating. Okay, now with that out of the way, let's get started on Hunter. So for Hunter, before we get started on anything, I'm going to go over jump choices and explain why they matter. You have 4 available jumps on Hunter. You have strafe jump, triple jump, high jump, and blink. Blink is only useful in certain scenarios, which we'll touch on later. High jump is pretty worthless. Triple jump is really good for beginners. If you're just starting out, definitely be on triple jump. It also is the jump that gets you the most distance easily. Strafe jump is a really good combat jump. And by combat jump, I mean like using it in normal encounters. For example, if you need to change direction quickly, or like jump over an enemy maybe, or just change momentum really quickly, that's what strafe jump's for. Or another example, which is where our first piece of tech comes in, if you see a low-hanging ceiling, you can bang your head against the ceiling and go faster. This is really easy to do and is really practical. Granted, you need a low-hanging ceiling. So, hey, when it's there, you do it, right? Personally, I rate this as really easy, so that'll be 1 Zavala of difficulty, with around 2 Zavalas of practicality. Back to the topic of triple jump. Triple jump is really good at making distances, and is really good for beginners because you don't really have to think too much. On top of that, you can make some jumps that strafe jump just can't make, like this one in the Presage mission. You cannot make this on strafe jump. But hey, triple jump's got you. You know what also's got you? Warlock. So Warlock is also really good at making distance jumps. And Warlock also has 4 options. They got Burst Glide, Strafe Glide, Balance Glide, and Blink. We'll get to Blink shortly, but Balance Glide is pretty worthless. Strafe Glide is also only good if you're on Heat Rises, which we'll also get to shortly. And Burst Glide is going to be your main glide. The reason Burst Glide is your main glide is you see in blue text there where it says strong initial boost. That means you get a strong initial boost of speed the first time you engage your glide when you jump off the ground. So in practice, you want to be in the air the least amount of time possible so you can get that strong initial boost every time you hit the ground. Now you know that you want to be close to the ground. In order to start moving fast, you're going to want to start off with a normal jump like this. But before you hit the ground, engage your glide, right? That'll give you your initial burst for the first time you start. So engage your glide. After this point, you're going to jump again, right? But you're going to jump and engage your glide and then instantly disengage. So that looks like this, right? Once you do this, you can't engage your glide as soon as you're hitting the ground again because you already engaged it over there. So instead, you're going to engage it after and just keep repeating this. And now you're just naturally moving a bit faster. And you can do a mix and match, you know. You can just do it after. You can do it before. As long as you don't engage your glide twice before touching the ground, you won't lose speed. So back to the topic of strafe glide. Remember when I said it was only good with heat rises? Well, yeah. Heat rises is an aspect only on Solar Warlock that makes it so when you eat your grenade, you can basically stay in the air for as long as heat rises last. And the reason I showed you how to jump with strafe jump first is because they're really similar to each other. So for strafe jump and heat rises, you notice my timer on the bottom left there that says heat rises? That is extended every time you get a kill while airborne. So if you're ever on Heat Rises, you want to be on Strafe Jump because it's really similar to Burst Jump. Notice how I am doing the same exact thing where I just hit it as soon as I jump and then disengage. That doesn't work if you're on Burst. You actually just lose momentum. You don't actually gain that burst. You're actually just slower, as you can see. So that is the one specific scenario where you're actually on Strafe Glide. Also keep in mind that abilities have different cooldowns in this game. So a healing nade will be on a 42-second cooldown if you're at 100 or greater nade stat, and a firebolt nade will be at 30 seconds cooldown. So if you're on Heat Rises, you might want to invest in firebolt because Heat Rises uses your grenade. Remember when I mentioned Blink earlier on Hunter and Warlock? Now's that time. So Blink isn't really too useful. It's only useful with a certain tech called Shatter Skating, which we'll get into later. All you need to know right now is that Blink makes you go up elevators faster, and the amount of distance you gain depends on where you are looking. So for the furthest distance, you're going to want to look 30 degrees up. Alright, moving on to Titan. Titan has 3 available jumps. They have Strafe Lift, High Lift, and Catapult Lift. You don't really have to worry about High Lift at all. It's not really used anywhere. Catapult Lift is a good combat jump and has good potential in crossing long chasms with a certain exotic, which I'll get into later. Strafe Lift is really good for retaining momentum, specifically with things like Mountaintop, Eager Edge, and Thruster class ability. Starting off with Catapult. Catapult is a good combat jump. It's good for verticality. The one downside is, if you want any movement tech with this, you're going to need to rebind your jump. So let's do that real quick with the scroll wheel. Yes, scroll wheel. You're going to need to click a lot. If you're on controller, you're going to need a paddle that hits the A button a lot. If you don't have that, sucks. You lose. Better luck next time, pal. So for Catapult, what you're going to want to do is just spam the scroll wheel. That's literally it. That's all you do. And, you know, you go somewhat fast. That's all you need to do. You can also chain this with Thruster and gain a bunch of momentum at the start. But, you know, you need to sacrifice your scroll wheel for that. Not everyone is down for that. The alternative to this is Strafe Glide. Strafe Glide, you know, doesn't have the same verticality. You do have to try a little bit harder. But the added benefit is I don't need to spam scroll wheel anymore. So that's pretty good. I can do the same thruster thing. That's pretty good. I just want to be in my glide the whole time. And the one benefit to Strafe Jump is if you have any grenade launcher with the micro missile frame, so something like the Theodolite, for example, or a Lithium, this is an exotic, but it doesn't actually tell you it's a micro missile, you can launch yourself up. Any class can launch themselves up like I just did here, right? And you're going to want to hit space and then shoot. What makes Titan special specifically for this is if they hit space and then shoot and then engage their thruster, they go really fast and they retain their momentum. And if you need to go really high, it's the same thing. Look down, jump, shoot, and then engage your thruster. And like that, easy peasy. Titan can do that for free, other classes can't. If you were on Hunter, you'll only make it around this high. If you were on Warlock, you'll only make it around this high, which still isn't Titan. But Warlock has a silly little thing where if they're eating their grenade, while they're eating their grenade, they retain some of their momentum, then they can make it up to Titan. Overall, mountaintop jumps in this game are pretty useful, and out of the Zavala scale, I'd rate this a solid 2 Zavalas of difficulty with a practicality of 3 Zavalas. Moving on to our next topic, you see that sword on the bottom left of my inventory? Yeah, that thing's pretty important. You know how I mentioned Eager Edge earlier? So yeah, there's actually a lot of nuance to this. So the way Eager Edge works is, once you take out your sword, you see how it's procced on the bottom left there? And you see how it just went away? It disappears after you hold it for a little bit, and it reappears as soon as you take your sword out. But you can't take it out too fast after it disappears because it won't reproc. So you have to wait a little bit with it in your pocket. Once you have it out, you can light swing with it, and it'll take you around 10 times further, a lot further than a normal swing, like this. But if you want to keep the momentum, you can jump and then take your sword out, or take your sword out, then jump, and then light swing. I didn't keep my momentum there because I didn't do something crucial. You need to jump, then light swing, then swap off your weapon. If you do it right, you will go much further. And if you want to keep your momentum, you just keep spamming jump. And this is the same thing on all classes. And remember how I showed you how to move with your jumps on the other classes? Same thing here. So for Warlock, remember how you don't want to spam jump 2 times before you hit the floor? Same thing here, but with Eager Edge. Stay low to the ground. Easy peasy. Keep the momentum, and you can keep chaining it. And for Titan, same thing. Eager Edge. Press the jump button. Just keep chaining these two. Job done. If you want an Eager Edge sword now, you can always go to the World tab, and then if you click on Eternity, it will be in the Dares of Eternity playlist. You will have to grind this. You will be looking for a half-truth sword or the other half sword. Both of these can roll Eager Edge. Or you can roll this sword that I can't pronounce in the Arms Week event. There's also another tech you can do that involves water. If you have a water puddle, you can Eager Edge into it and then hit heavy attack, and you will retain a lot of momentum that way. Also, for reference, when people do a fake Eager Edge and retain momentum this way, this is what people call a fake skate. So keep that in mind for future if you ever hear that. Also, you can stop all your momentum by hitting a heavy attack in midair. So that'll stop you. Or if you pull out your sword and you proc Eager Edge, that will also stop your momentum. If you find your Eager Edge tracking to enemies, you can look up most of the time in order to make it so your sword doesn't track the enemies. If the enemy is above you, then you want to look down. We're finally done with basic movement. For Eager Edge on the Zavala scale, I'd rate the difficulty a solid 1 Zavala, and for practicality, I'd rate this a solid 5 Zavalas. Now that we're finally done with the core 3, we can actually get started on the fun stuff. We're going to start off with Hunter first, and then move on to Warlock and Titan. So starting off with Hunter, our first piece of tech is going to be Grapple-Ascensioning, and basically this is only available on the Prismatic class if you have the Ascension aspect equipped and Grapple. Grapple is quite self-explanatory. You hit the grenade button, you grapple to it, right? The cool thing you can do with Grapple is if you swap weapons mid-grapple, it instantly takes away your grapple and keeps your momentum. This isn't useful for this tech, but it's good to know. Also, if you grapple onto a tangle or a grapple point, it will refund your grapple. So keep that in mind. If you ever find a tangle, you can grab it and chuck it and then grapple onto it, and you'll keep your grapple. Ascension, on the other hand, takes your class ability. A quick refresher on Ascension for those of you that are new. It makes it so whenever you use your air move, it spends your class ability to give you upwards momentum and jolts everything around you while also giving you amplified. It can also be used unlimited amount of times if you are in a roaming super, which can sometimes be useful to save you from fall, which you would otherwise die from. For this specific section, we don't really care about the amplified or jolting part of Ascension. We only care about the upwards momentum. So whenever we're grapple ascensioning, we have to be very aware of if our grenade ability is up and if our class ability is up. So in order to grapple ascension, you're going to need to hold forward, then hit the grenade button, and then hit the air move button. If you do this right, you should get launched. But in order to do this right, you need to know exactly when to ascension. Notice how in this clip, you start off really slow when you first grapple and then gain up speed as you get closer to your grapple. You're going to want to ascension as soon as you hit max speed. So you can't really do it at the start, it has to be at the later end. Once you have it down, it should be pretty easy to do, and this is a pretty good way to build up speed without any real investment. So on the Zavala scale, I'd rate this a solid 2 Zavalas of difficulty, with a solid 4 Zavalas of practicality. Building off of Ascension grappling, remember when I said you could chuck a tangle and then grapple onto it, and that would refund your grapple? Well, there's a way to have the equivalent of a tangle in your pocket, but it doesn't refund your grapple. If you have on the Gunpowder Gamble aspect, you can grapple onto your Gunpowder Gamble, and this makes it so you inherit the speed of the Gunpowder Gamble whenever you grapple onto it, on top of also having the grapple point connected to the Gunpowder Gamble. If you're new and don't know how Gunpowder Gamble works, basically, if you get a weapon kill, that is 1 stack of Gunpowder Gamble out of 6, and if you get an ability kill, that is worth 3 stacks out of 6. Once you're at max stacks, you will have a Gunpowder Gamble ready in your grenade slot. If you actually want to do this, you're going to need to throw your Gunpowder Gamble and then wait a little bit and actually aim at the Gunpowder Gamble, then hit your grapple. You can't just really spam your grenade button because you can miss. And if you miss, people around you will notice and then point and laugh at you. So it's even worse. But if you do get it down, it's actually pretty useful. So on the Zavala scale, for difficulty, I'd rate this a solid 3. For practicality, I'd rate it a 2 solely because I know people don't like Gunpowder Gamble. But if you love Gunpowder Gamble, this is actually a 3 to 4. And remember how we learned Grapple-Ascensioning earlier? You can actually combine these two, and they're pretty potent together. So do whatever you want with that information. We're going to be moving on to Shatter Skating now. So if you don't know what Shatter Skating is a tech where if you do an attack with a sword off of a ledge, and then while you're off that ledge, you hit jump and then your air move, makes it so you go faster than the bad Netflix adaptation of The Flash. So in order to do this, you're going to need to be on Stasis Hunter, and you're going to need to have Shatter Dive equipped. That's why it is called Shatter Skating, because you have Shatter Dive. So if you don't know what Shatter Dive does, Shatter Dive is an air move that brings you straight down whenever you hit air move. And whenever you hit the ground, it'll explode any stasis crystals or frozen enemies. It's not really too useful in normal play. People mainly use it for movement. Another thing to note is not all swords are born equal. So a vortex frame sword will be faster than an adaptive frame sword, but both will be faster than a wave frame sword because a wave frame sword can't really heavy attack horizontally. And for Shatter Skating, your heavy attack is what makes you the fastest, so keep that in mind. Now that you know what to use, you want to go find your nearest ledge, and ideally, this ledge is a sharp cutoff, so like a 90-degree ledge. Once you find your ledge, you're going to want to pull your sword out to proc Eager Edge, so you get the most speed, and then you're going to want a heavy attack, and then you're going to want to hit jump and air move at the same time, but make sure you hit jump first. I know this can be pretty daunting at first, so I'm going to go into even more depth here. There's a sweet spot after you heavy attack while you're floating in the air where you can hit jump and air move, and you actually pull this off successfully. You're going to want to hit jump and air move as soon as you get off the ledge, not before you're off the ledge and not too far after. If not, you will just plummet to the ground. Overall, I give Shatter Skating a difficulty rating of 3 on the Zavala scale and a practicality rating of also 3, solely because no one's really on stasis, and this is mostly only useful for transition encounters or speedruns. Also, another thing to know about Shatter Skating before we move on is if it's a really long distance, you can also swap to arc mid-jump in order to gain more height and make it farther. Whenever you swap to arc, you want to be on blink and look 30 degrees up. If you do this right, you should be able to make the whole chasm in the Desert Perpetual raid. Also, another thing to know, Shatter Skating has a little brother, but no one likes this guy because he uses your class ability. His little brother is called Strand Skating, and the only difference between Shatter Skating and Strand Skating is that you can't hold movement keys while you do it, and it has to be off of a declined slope. You also need the Ensnaring Slam aspect in order to do this. Ensnaring Slam is basically the same thing as Shatter Dive, but instead of popping crystals or frozen enemies, it just suspends them. And when I mean a decline slope, I mean any decline. It can be the world's tiniest decline, and it'll still work. The problem is when the decline is too sharp, you use your class ability. So that's why no one really uses this thing, because you have to wait for your class ability, or there's a risk of losing it. Also, when I say don't hit movement keys, I mean don't hold forward, go left, go backwards, or go right. As you're hitting heavy attack, space, and air move. And the same goes for controller too. So on the Zavala scale, I'd rate this a difficulty of 4 with a practicality of 2. We're finally done with specifically Hunter, and now we can move on to Warlock. I also need you to know that if you're ever in a movement encounter on Hunter, put on the Stompy's Exotic, and it'll make your life easier. Now that we're finally on Warlock, I need to explain to you how Icarus Dash works. For Warlock, the main movement subclass is Solar Warlock, and with Solar Warlock comes Icarus Dash and Heat Rises. Right now we're going to focus on Icarus Dash because it is more fundamental to moving well on Warlock. So for those that don't know, Icarus Dash makes it so you have a little burst of speed whenever you hit air move. But you may notice this is actually really slow right now. That's because we didn't engage our glide before we Icarus Dashed. If we actually engage our glide, we go much further and faster. The person on the left is no glide engaged, while the person on the right is with glide engaged. Whenever I say glide engage, I really mean your second jump. So your first jump is your normal jump, and your second jump is your glide engaging jump. So now that you know this, in order to Icarus dash properly, I want you to run, jump, engage your glide, and then hit the air move button. And you can combine this with any movement tech, let's say Eager Edge for example, in order to go much faster. For specifically Eager Edge, make sure you swap off your sword before engaging your glide so you can keep the momentum. And also make sure to not engage your glide twice before touching the ground. Before we move on, you also need to know that Icarus Dash has a little brother, and that's called Weave Walk. But Weave Walk is actually like a really buff little brother, so he is much faster. But the problem with Weave Walk is that it isn't on the solar class, and it also eats your melee ability charges. Functionally, they both work the same way, but because Weave Walk takes your melee charges instead of being on a 5-second cooldown, it is more resource heavy. But on the flip side, it can be spammed more in short succession, so you actually get more speed. Overall, I rate Icarus Dash and Weave Walk a difficulty rating of 2, with Icarus Dash getting a practicality rating of 5, while Weave Walk gets a practicality rating of 4, solely because Weave Walk can run out of charges while Icarus Dash can't. Another tech Warlock can do relates specifically to Heat Rises and was subtly hinted at in the basic movement section. For this, you're going to need a missile frame grenade launcher like Mountaintop or Lithium. Basically, this is really simple. The only thing you need to know is while you are charging a grenade, you actually conserve more momentum than having Heat Rises proc or just jumping normally. This isn't really that useful, but it is good to know because we can use Heat Rises to scale walls with missile frame grenade launchers. Just be really careful while climbing because if you mess up, the guy that calls you stupid will come back and call you stupid again.
Stupid.
Man, I hate that guy. Alright, moving on. Warlocks also have a form of skating like Hunters, and they are basically identical, but instead of hitting air move at the end, you hit the super button at the end. So if you don't know how to Shatter skate or Wellskate, I recommend clicking on the Hunter portion because I went really in depth there. And it is the exact same thing. You just hit the super button where you would hit the air move button. And if you didn't notice it there, you can chain a Wellskate into an Icarus Dash so you can go even further. Overall, I'd rate a Wellskate the same difficulty as Shatter Skate, which is a difficulty of 3, but its practicality actually drops down to 2 because you need your super, and if you mess up, you lose your super. But I don't want my Warlock players to feel like they got cheated, so I'm going to make Hunters come here to learn ground skating, and y'all get to learn ground skating here. So ground skating is the same as a Well or a Shatter Skate, but instead of doing it off a ledge, you do it off flat ground. And this is notoriously hard to do because the timing is really precise. The reason it's so precise is because for ground skating, you want to jump, light swing, jump, and then super or air move if you're on Hunter. For this example, my jump was on scroll wheel down. You'll know why later. And usually this isn't a problem, but you see this diagram here I'm showing you again? You all see the yummy zone? You need to hit all those buttons the same time it would take you for a normal Shatter Skate or Wellskate in the yummy zone. The problem is, whenever you jump in this game, you can't jump again too quickly because you actually have a cooldown. Or your input doesn't register that you hit 2 different instances of the same button in a short amount of time. So by the time your input resets in real life, so let's say I hit my space button and my space button is actively unpressing itself against the keyboard, I would need to press that space button again midway on its way up to actually hit a ground skate. So instead of having a big old yummy zone, my yummy zone is effectively cut in half at the beginning section just because my space button, which is my first input, needs to unstick itself from the keyboard. Remember when I told you when to Shatter Skate or Wellskate, you needed to jump before you hit air move or super? Well, that jump is actually really misleading because you can hit jump as many times as you want before you hit air move. As long as you are in that yummy zone, you are okay. So if ground skates are effectively jumping followed by a Shatter or Wellskate, my first jump is the equivalent of me falling off the ledge in a Shatter or Wellskate. And because they're basically the same thing, since I am technically off the ledge whenever I first jump in a ground skate, I can hit the jump button as many times as I want after I light attack with my sword and still hit a ground skate as long as I am in the equivalent of the yummy zone in a ground skate. So basically, if you didn't catch that, which I assume a lot of people didn't, you're going to want to use scroll wheel as your jump button, and if you're on a controller, you're going to want a paddle that repeatedly presses the jump button. It is possible without these things, it's just really hard. So overall, I'd rate ground skating a solid 5 out of 5 in difficulty and a solid 4 out of 5 in practicality on both Warlock and Hunter. We're basically done with Warlock now, but while I'm telling you to bind jump to scroll wheel, you can actually spam jump at the end of a staircase to gain a lot of speed. Oh, I messed up.
Stupid.
Finally got rid of that guy. Okay, yeah, so you want to do something like this. Also for Warlock, your exotic of choice is going to be Transversive Steps, or if you're using specifically Heat Rises, you'd be on Starfire Protocol. Moving on to Titan, Titan doesn't really have much. The most they have is their Shoulder Charge and Shiver Strike melees, which are good, but not as good as the other classes. Or if they use their exotic named Lion Ramparts, they can fly forever if they're on an Eager Edge Sword and Catapult Jump. In order to fly forever, you want to alternate between Eager Edging and jumping. But whenever you jump, you do a really short burst, because the idea here is you want to keep your initial jump juice, because that gives the highest vertical momentum in Catapult Jump. So you want your downtime to be a horizontal sword swing so you don't lose as much jump juice. And whenever I say jump juice, I mean the amount of juice your catapult lift has, because catapult lift basically functions like a jetpack, but whenever you're not actively using your jetpack, it is slowly recharging in the air. So if you want to do this, you want to switch to your sword and swipe your sword, and then swap off your sword, and then engage your jetpack, and then turn off your jetpack, and then repeat the exact same thing. Overall, I think this is pretty useful. If there's no floor, you can literally fly forever until you run out of sword ammo. So on the Zavala scale, I would rate this a difficulty of 3 with a practicality of also 3. Mainly because there aren't really many places where you actually need to fly like this. And the other thing that Titan had, which was mountaintop jumping with strafe jump, was already covered in the basic jumping section. So that's basically it for Titan. Moving on next, we got some things all classes can do. If you have an Eager Edge Sword and hold jump, then light attack off a ledge, you can basically fall like you have 0 gravity, for as long as you are holding the jump button, which isn't too useful by itself, but whenever you combine it with something that gives you vertical momentum, like a grapple or an ascension, it can be somewhat useful. Also, you can deactivate it at any time by letting go of the jump button, and then you can activate your double jump after too. Overall, on the Zavala scale, I'd rate this a difficulty of 1 and a practicality rating of 2. Just because it can be done basically anywhere as long as you have Eager Edge. This next tech is going to require you to be on a Strand class or Prismatic Hunter, because you need the Grapple Grenade equipped. You're also going to need to own the Navigator Gun and Catalyst. If you have 2 Navigators, you can actually fly forever, as long as you keep swapping between them. In order to do this, you have to shoot your Navigator as you're off the floor, and then stay up in the air long enough so you can grapple onto it. While you're grappling, you can swap to your second Navigator, and then just keep grappling to the new grapple point. This whole thing hinges off not touching the floor, because if you touch the floor while Gordian Knot cooldown is on your screen, you will get a 30-second timer, and you can't swap Navigators to get rid of it, so you actually have to wait for the timer. Overall, this isn't really too complicated, it's just a lot of inputs, so I'd rate this a difficulty of 3, with a practicality of also 3, because it has the same use case as Titan with Lion Ramparts, but it's just way slower, but it makes up for it because it's on every class. While we're on the subject of grappling, you can also grapple onto rockets and Lumina shots. There's 2 different variations of this. There's either doing it straight up or doing it at an angle. If you're doing it straight up, then you can use a rocket. If you're doing it at an angle, I don't recommend it. It is almost impossible to hit, because if it's not straight up, you have to account for recoil, and it is much easier to grapple onto a Lumina projectile than a rocket. So if you want to hit a horizontal Lumina grapple consistently, what you're going to want to do is wait for your gun to be at the apex whenever you shoot it, and then hit your grenade button. Also, ideally, don't move while you're doing this. You can do it while moving, it's just way harder. If you want to hit a vertical rocket grapple or Lumina grapple, just look straight up, and as soon as you hit the shoot button, you hit the grenade button. Just, make sure you hit the shoot button first. For the Zavala scale, I'd rate a horizontal Lumina grapple a difficulty of 4 and a practicality of 3, just because you need to get a kill with Lumina in order to do this. But if it's a vertical rocket or Lumina grapple, the difficulty drops down to 2, and the practicality also drops down to 2, because there are only like 2 use cases in the game for this, but it's really useful whenever it is a steep vertical cliff. Now I'm going to rapid fire some random facts because I have no clue where to put these in the video, but I feel like there's some things that are interesting to know for a new player. If you actively have a lightweight frame gun in your hands, you move faster with the gun in your hands. Some exotic armors just have this built in, but if you are on the hunter class, you intrinsically have one of these built into you, and the lightweight buff can only stack up to 2. So if I was on the hunter class, had a lightweight SMG, and had stompies on, I would only get the benefits of 2 of those. If you have Ascension and Bread Spectre on, you can actually use Ascension and stand on your clone that you make from Bread Spectre. If you have any crossbow, you can actually shoot a wall and stand on your crossbow bolts. Also, if you're on Well of Radiance or Phoenix Dive, or an air move that goes straight down really fast, if you hit it right before you hit the floor at just the right time, you can use the ability instantly. Also, you can do a really bad version of a skate. If you heavy attack off a ledge and hit super, you retain some momentum on certain supers, but it uses your super, so it's not actually that useful. That's basically it for the video today. So now it's officially shilling time. If you aren't subscribed to the channel already, please subscribe. It helps me out a lot. And I also stream on Twitch regularly at twitch.tv/Haminator, so drop by. And because I need engagement bait, if you made it this far in the video, comment down below that Melito smells like eggs, so I know that you actually watched the whole thing. Alright, later everybody. Bye bye.